Hey everyone, Nomad here. Welcome back to Wanted, which is my Dead by Daylight series where we discuss everything about the Deathslinger and teach you how to play him more effectively. Tonight on Wanted, we'll be dissecting the Killer Shack and learning how you can outplay survivors from every possible angle of it. But before we can talk about how to pull off shots like this,
oh my god!
we need to go back to basics and cover the layout of the shack itself as well as its variations. As a quick side note, if you enjoy this video or learned anything from it, please remember to like and subscribe. It's a huge help and it motivates me to make more videos. Now, let's talk about the Killer Shack. Dead by Daylight is a game full of random and procedurally generated maps, but the Killer Shack stands as the single most consistent structure in the entire game, appearing in 37 of the 44 maps that are currently in Dead by Daylight as of me making this video. Now, while some features of the shack might change from map to map, the base layout is always the same, and it will always spawn with one vault location, 2 doorways, and the God Pallet. It's also worth mentioning that both the basement and a generator can spawn in the Killer Shack, but we'll save that for later. What you need to know now is that of those 37 maps I just mentioned, the only shack that generates differently is the one on Dead Dog Saloon, where a single breakable wall will always spawn directly opposite from the God Pallet. Other than that one specific shack, the only differences between the other 36 Killer Shacks are the designs of the buildings themselves and the objects placed in or around them. For normal killers, this wouldn't be too noteworthy, but the Deathslinger is a killer where you have to be aware of every gap, wall, and piece of geometry if you want to make the most of his power. For example, sticking with Dead Dog Saloon, while you might know that you can shoot through these gaps on the long wall side, I'll bet you didn't know about this gap shot near the window. But that's a little more advanced. Let's keep it simple for now and go over some fundamentals that you can use in every chase on every map. Good fundamentals are the foundation of any strong killer. More often than not, you're going to be making use of these fundamentals in your games, so it's important to learn them, and if you're new to Deathslinger, these are the 3 most important things you can take away from this video. Number 1, you can shoot and strike survivors through windows. This works whether you're on the inside or the outside of the shack, effectively making every angle around the vault location unsafe for survivors. And when a survivor is vaulting the window, it's a guaranteed hit. Number 2, predictions and trick shots are fun, but you can and should use your power to close the distance on survivors when possible. Rather than letting survivors go around corners of the shack or reach the pallet, just shoot them instead of going for a lunge that you might miss or get stunned out of. Number 3, branching off of this, zoning is an important tool for the Deathslinger, and pulling up your rifle only to not shoot and instead holster it will force survivors away from windows, pallets, and even walls, causing them to lose distance. With these fundamentals in mind, let's look at 2 scenarios, one where the survivor is on the inside of the shack and another where they're on the outside. Good survivors will traditionally hover around the center of the shack, and if the killer comes through the doorway, they can hit a fast vault at the window or run to the God Pallet. But one of the reasons why Deathslinger is so amazing at the shack is because he completely shuts down every possible option the survivor has here. The inside of the shack is very open, and you're all but guaranteed a hit if both you and the survivor are on the inside of it. If the survivor tries to go for the vault, just remember, as we mentioned, that you can shoot and strike through windows, so don't be afraid to wait until the survivor is locked into an animation to go for a quick injury or down. If they move towards the pallet, you can zone them away from it by aiming down sights and then holstering. If that doesn't work and they drop the pallet, you can shoot over it and let your chain break to apply the deep wound effect. Just remember, you can't put survivors into the dying state this way, but you will injure healthy survivors. Now that we've gone over some tips for the inside of the shack, let's move to the outside of it. When a survivor doesn't have any objects to play around, they'll often try and make erratic movements to throw your aim off. If this happens, you can just hold your M2 and wait for them to run back into your sights, or walk them down for an M1. When a survivor is hugging one of the shack walls or nearing a corner, a common tactic they might use is to move away from the wall to throw you off. This can also happen at the window, where a survivor will move towards it only to fake it at the last second by moving away from it or crouching. All you have to do in these scenarios is be patient and wait until they commit to an action before shooting or going for an M1. With these tips in mind, the time it takes for you to down someone at the shack should be cut down massively. But what do we do when a survivor is very skilled, utilizing check spots and not falling for such simple mind games? Now that we've gone over the layout of the shack itself and the basic approaches you can use while playing it, we can get into more advanced tactics that will end your chases in literal seconds, even against the strongest of survivors. But before we start, I need to remind everyone watching this that survivors have a third-person camera angle. Slinger is a large killer, and when he aims his rifle, it sticks out very far in front of him. Survivors will see when you're coming around a corner, and they will see you if you pre-aim through windows. Part of being a good Deathslinger is being unpredictable and giving survivors as little information as as possible as to what you're going to do next. This isn't exactly something I can teach you as it is situational, but the best way to understand what I'm talking about is to look at things from the survivor's perspective. Watch some survivor gameplay where they play into Deathslinger. Pay attention to their camera movement and try to visualize what the survivor you're chasing is seeing as they round corners and move past objects that block their line of sight. You should always keep these things in mind, and when you do, it will make everything in this guide that much more effective. Back to it. Let's start with check spots. Good survivors will often wait at the corners of the shack or other specific locations before making their next move. These are known as safe spots or check spots, and in my opinion, it's how you can tell the difference between an average survivor and a good one. While this can be difficult for other killers to deal with, you can use it to your advantage as Slinger and pop out for shots at unsuspecting angles. Just be mindful of your red stain, and as I mentioned, envision the chase through the survivor's eyes, not just your own. And I also can't stress enough how important sound is in this game, so pay attention and listen for footsteps, grunts of pain, and other indicators that tell you what a survivor is doing. Now let's talk about those shots that will end your chases in seconds. If you're near the god pallet as a survivor runs by the window, or vice versa, you can shoot them through the shack and drag them around the building or towards the window for a hit. This also works at the opposite doorway. If a survivor rounds this corner, you can double back a little bit and shoot them when they enter the shack or run by the doorway. Then you can pull them towards the window or around the building for a hit. If the god pallet is dropped and the survivor is on the inside of the shack, you can mind game them and force them to vault. Shoot them during the vault animation, and then move forward around the shack and hit the survivor with a lunge attack. Since survivors will often get caught on the lip of the doorway after they vault, you want to hold forward while hugging shack as tightly as possible, and then lunge right as the chain is about to break. Coup de grace makes this a guaranteed hit every single time if you want to get the hang of it, but it is incredibly consistent without coup provided you move perfectly. Just remember that if you hold forward while reeling, you move towards the survivor, and if you move backwards while reeling, they'll move towards you. And finally, if a survivor is on the inside of the shack and the building itself is in a corner or surrounded by weaker pallets, don't be afraid to shoot them and just let your chain break. This is an incredibly overlooked form of zoning for Slinger, as it forces survivors to stay in the area they were just injured at. In this case, it's the shack. And with all the things we've learned so far, in addition to the information that's coming up, you'll want a survivor to stay there. So now that we know the layout of the shack, some basic and advanced approaches to it, there's just one more thing to go over before you can consider yourself a master of the killer shack. For our fourth and final chapter, we'll go over the generator that spawns in the shack, the basement, and some map-specific shots you can make use of. I'm not going to go over every shack in excruciating detail right now, as that would make this video upwards of 20 minutes long. These are just a few of the many shots you can take through these shacks, and just for consistency, I'll go over some shacks that have less options. If you want to see a full video dissecting every single shack in the game, let me know by supporting this video with a comment, like, or subscribing to the channel. Back to it. Let's go over the generator first. While a survivor is inside the shack with you, they may try to use the generator to block your shots. It's relatively easy to play around this, but just be prepared for it because a last second dodge can throw you off. If you're outside the shack and the survivor is crouching behind the generator, there's not much you can do. But if they're standing, you can actually shoot over the generator's pistons and hit the top of their hitbox, then drag them around for a hit or let your chain break. Overall, having the generator spawn in the shack does make it weaker for you, but the basement is a different story. The basement can be a real pain in the ass if you're on the outside of the shack and a survivor hides on the staircase just outside your view. But if you're on the inside of the shack, you can use the basement to instantly down survivors. If you shoot and reel a survivor towards the edge of the basement, you can hit them as they fall, and their entire on-hit speed boost will be consumed by the stagger effect when they hit the ground. Even if you don't do it perfectly, you can still usually basic attack the survivor again before they hit the window or reach the god pallet. That's actually not all the basement is good for, however. It's a little more situational, but you can shoot a survivor through any gaps in the long wall and drag them into the basement, then break your chain manually by basic attacking and move inside the shack to cut them off for a basic attack. And I guess we can put this here too, since it's related to the basement. This works on most basements with standard designs. When a healthy survivor goes down the stairs for an unhook, you can shoot them through this gap in the corner of the brick wall. Then walk yourself backwards up the stairs and let your chain break. Depending on when and who you hit, you can get an incredibly nasty double hook, a fast down, and or potentially interrupt the unhook before it even happens. Let's go back up to the shack itself and tackle a few of the many different shack designs and what you can do with them. On a good portion of maps, Including but not limited to Coldwind Farm, Backwater Swamp, and Yamaoka Estate, the long outer wall has a boarded up window with a few large gaps you can shoot through. If you do this from the correct angle, you can drag the survivor around the shack and basic attack them. On Toba Landing, there are no gaps whatsoever and the wall is entirely solid. In my opinion, this is the worst possible killer shack for Deathslinger, and sometimes I just avoid it entirely. On Eyrie of Crows and Red Forest, there are multiple gaps in the shack that you can shoot through and sometimes basic attack off of. I'm mentioning these two shacks in particular because sometimes you can barely see the survivor through the gap. Remember that survivor hitboxes are the same between male and female survivors, and they're also shaped like giant pills, so you can shoot the top of a survivor's head through these gaps even if you can't see them. On Dead Dog Saloon, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, you can shoot through the many gaps on the long outer wall, but you can also shoot through this board on the other side and hit a survivor's feet. And finally, on the Backwater Swamp, there are a few gaps you can shoot through like these ones here, but there's also a small section behind these lockers where you can shoot through the wall and hit a survivor's head as they round the corner. That about does it for this chapter, but before I end the video, I wanted to put some miscellaneous tips here that didn't really fit anywhere else. When a survivor crouches in the corner of the killer shack to avoid your shot, you can always hit them. Just remember what we learned about survivor hitboxes. In my experience, the only consistent way survivors can dodge your shot in this manner is by crouching behind these large hay bales when they spawn on Coldwind Farm or when they crouch behind a generator. It won't happen too often, but sometimes a survivor will hide in a locker to avoid your shot. If a survivor does try this, you can just vault the window because they don't have enough time to get out of the locker and run away from you before you vault. And finally, remember to always pay attention to a survivor's movement patterns. If you see someone repeatedly fake windows, move away from walls, or even stand still, chances are they're probably going to keep doing it, at least until they get punished for it. The Deathslinger is kind of like Nurse, in the sense that a large part of your gameplay will be making decisions based on predictions or reactions based on what you know about the survivor's movement. And I think that about does it. I think that covers every single possible angle of the killer shack. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video or learned anything from it, please like and subscribe because I put a ton of time into this video. I also started a Discord server, so if you want to hang out with me and make new friends, there's a link down below with more information. Thank you for spending your time with me. Be sure to take care of yourselves, and I hope you have a wonderful night.